how to negotiate our way through the real estate field, because we get hired to do this. So negotiation in our field is very, very crucial. And I think, being able to find properties nowadays is fairly easy in regards to finding some properties out there. Now being able to get the property is a whole different story. So looking at it from that, it makes a difference that you know how to negotiate these transactions. So like I said, every day we have a way of negotiating our through life, essentially. So today what we're going to be covering is like the different facets of how, why, and kind of how you're going to be able to produce what you're trying to produce. So there's a couple of theories to this. One theory is this whole idea of win-win, right? It can happen that way, that you can get this whole idea of a win-win solution to your negotiation. Only problem with that is looking at it from coming into negotiations, you have to have what we call leverage. And a lot of the times when people are thinking win-win, they're already giving up a portion of what they normally use for leverage. So keep in mind, leverage is a key element of your negotiation process, because if you don't negotiate in such a way that you try to get everything or as much as you can, but also making the other party feel that they're getting something good off of it. So being able to understand the process and how we'll be able to do that. So today we're going to be covering this. So here we go. Give me 1 second here. And there you go. So looking at it from the kind of stuff that we do, let me go ahead and explain to you this whole process. So the first thing that you have to understand is you have to be able to separate your emotions from the problem or whatever something that you're trying to solve. So when you're going into a transaction, you're trying to get your buyers let's say, seller concession, like trying to get the seller to pay for some of their closing costs, right? So if that is the problem, right, you need to get yourself emotionally away from that. But then again, at the same time, the person that you're dealing with or the person that you're working with, which is let's say the listing agent, you need to be able to kind of work your way through the process that agent is your advocate, somebody that would actually kind of go to bat for you or talk to the seller about getting the seller concession. In order for you to do that, you need to actually connect with that agent. And in order for you to connect with that agent, you need to figure out what makes them tick. So in a very short period of time, when you're talking to the listing agent, you're trying to figure out what type of personality they are. Knowing understanding the type of personalities there are, there's about 4 personalities that's being used in this type of field that we're in. And the 4 personalities goes like this. The 1 personality works off of a scenario where the person feels that everything that they want to go after everything, they want to pursue everything. There's actually many books written about this. It's really true psychology in regards to what we're trying to do. So the first one, there was a seminar that I went to one time, and they were talking about, like, they color coded this, and they call this the orange. This is about 10% of the population. That is an orange. And that orange population really deals with being more like a free thinker, someone who says how they feel, and they're really in tune with what's going on, and they're high risk or risk takers or creative, that kind of mindset or that kind of psychology. For those type of people, you need to be able to kind of connect with them through being able to kind of exchange stories and being able to kind of mirror them in such a way where they feel comfortable with you, because it's easy to get along with those type of people. And I happen to be one of those type of people, actually. Very outgoing a lot of the times, and a lot of the times like willing to take certain risk that other people are not willing to do. So those also a lot of your entrepreneurs are actually falling into that, the ones that are doing, creating, and building. And then you have what we call the gold or the yellow. The gold, the yellow is about 60% of our population, somewhere around there. And the gold or the yellow are the ones that are very detail oriented, and they want everything a certain way. They want predictability. They want pretty much, they're more in tune for working for a company, like a job, that kind of stuff. That's 60% of our population. And the reason why you need to understand that is because if you're missing things on your offer, you're gonna annoy the heck out of a person who is a gold or a yellow, because they want things done right. They want things done a proper way, a certain process, that kind of thing. So those people are also very good at administration and management. Those people are able to put together, organize things, and kind of, for events and everything. That's the kind of person you really want. You want someone who actually is detail oriented, process driven, and follows the rules. Whereas the orange, they don't like following rules. They got their own rules in their head and how they actually process. So this is very important to understand the psychology with it. So when you separate your emotions from the transaction or from the problem or from the situation, and you're trying to connect with somebody, this is knowing these personality types makes a huge difference. And then you have what they call the greens, or the analytics. Someone color coded this a while back, I remember, but I can't remember the name of the book. But essentially, they do the analysis. They like to actually see graphs and charts and everything that actually deals with logical things, that that they can kind of figure. Everything has to actually make sense. They're not in tune very well with their emotions as much as they are in tune with figuring out where everything fits into those numbers, or into those charts, or into those analysis that they need to do for a particular transaction. So those type of people, when you're dealing with them, make sure, number one, your numbers are correct. Make sure that when you're talking, that you make sense, that everything that you're dealing with and you're more focused on are logical things that you're going to be discussing with them. And that helps you actually connect with that investor, with that listing agent. So that's the that part. And then you have the last one, which is the fourth one that we're talking about, are the blues. The blues are more emotionally connected people. So in order for you to really connect with these people, they love to hear stories. Stories that relate to successes, stories that relate to positivity things, stories that connect to the heart, stories that actually that creates emotions when they hear those stories. And some people actually, when you can tell that type of scenario and you start talking to them about your kids, or you start talking about like your parents, those kind of things, your family, and how important it is, and those kind of things, you tend to connect with those type of people that way. So it's really about and the whole idea that you care, or the showing that you really care, makes a big difference with those type of group. And then you have being able to actually know this, right? This is how you're going to cater your presentation. This is how you're going to be able to kind of maneuver through your negotiations. So when you're looking at it from what your focus, when you're talking to someone, you're trying to get them to tell you as much as you could what the motivation of the seller is. A good listing agent normally would not actually give you that. But if you can connect with the listing agent to that level, sometimes they would. And sometimes with that information is invaluable for you to be able to move things forward and be able to make it happen. So that in itself makes a big difference in regards to being able to kind of move things along, because if you know the motivation, now you can cater your presentation even more towards that motivation. And when you're talking to that person, depending on the type of personality they are, it makes a big difference. So back then, and not done as much now, we used to actually present in person to the seller. Those days are gone. I haven't presented anything to the seller for many, many years. But we used to come over to the house of the seller and we actually literally present our offer. And one situation like this happened where the seller actually, when we were showing the house, the seller mentioned that they have another property already they moved into, and they're actually paying 2 mortgages. So then I kind of knew their motivation. I never had to ask because the buyer was asking them all these questions, and I'm like just like paying attention to what the conversation was. So when I showed up to the presentation, right, and I presented my offer and I was asking for seller contribution, the seller's like, and plus reducing the price to go along with it. So I was like, I knew exactly where my position was in the negotiation table. So I knew I had the upper hand because I knew information that I shouldn't have known, but I also know their motivation. And that in itself make a big difference in terms of how I would actually move my presentation forward. So I went and sat down with them. I explained to them why my buyer needs to sell a contribution. I explained to them that they do like the property, but they have 2 other properties that they're really looking at, and which they did. They did have 2 other properties they were looking at, but this is the preferred property. So if given an opportunity, and this was a market where it was a buyer's market. So the listings actually are not selling as quickly. So now here you are. You have a seller that's not ready to let go of the buyer, because even though I presented, so the offer that we wrote was around $325,000, and then we asked for like $10,000 seller contribution, and then on top of that we reduced the price to $305,000. So essentially we're asking for almost $35,000 from the $325,000, put it for $305,000. So when I was done actually presenting my offer, I passed it to the listing agent. And the listing agent, from what I can tell, is fairly new. So it's very important for you to understand, you have to know your surroundings, right? You have to know who you're dealing with. So I happen to know that the this listing agent was fairly new. And she was being all formal about it. It's like, okay, it's all good. And she ended up talking to her seller in front of me. So, which is the worst thing you'll ever do. You don't divulge the information of the conversation you normally have with your seller, because that allows you to actually still have that leverage. Well, they have this conversation, and what ended up happening is that conversation turned into a situation where they're like, well, you know what? Why don't we bump this thing up to like $10,000 more for $315,000, right? So this is a good example of what negotiation is all about. So $315,000, they bump up the price. So now the paperwork, they made initial and bring it back to me. And I was actually sitting there right there on the table. And this is what I did. And this is a very important thing to actually understand when you're dealing with these kind of things. What I ended up doing is I ended up actually looking at the offer and sat there quietly. And sat there. And I stared at the offer for over a minute. Can you imagine? The anxiety of the 2 sellers and the listing agent, and I was just staring at it. I'm like trying to figure I was trying to figure out what to do with it, right? So 5, 10, another minute actually passes by, and they're like, "What's wrong with the offer? Isn't it good enough that we're actually like giving you $25,000 instead of like $20,000 instead of $35,000?" And I looked at them. I don't know if I can make it work. But one thing I did is I waited for them to speak. So whoever actually speaks first loses. Mm-hmm. And the reason why is because the insecurity, it's the posturing, the positioning. What you normally would do when you negotiate, you don't divulge your cards up front. That's the problem with the win-win. With a win-win scenario, when you're coming into a negotiated scenario, and we think it's good, it's a good concept. But the problem is if you're coming in there with the whole idea of win-win, and it's hard for you to win when you're already giving up something, because in order for it to be a win-win, right, you're giving up something, you need to go in there with not giving up anything. That's the way you're going to get to where you need to go in your negotiations.
because you're trying not to budge about anything. And the way I look at it is you bump it up slowly. Like, you know, if it's becoming more difficult to actually for them to respond, then you bump it up like $3,000-$5,000. You know, so smaller increments. And they'll come down a lot more, especially if you know their motivation. But in this case, everything is like laid out to me. So I was like, this is like the best example of what to do when you know all the information that you're going into a transaction. So negotiation is about preparation and knowing as much as you can in terms of information. So when you have that information, now you can use that towards getting your client what you want. So I looked at it after a minute and a half. They said, what's wrong? I said, well, you know what? I don't think my buyer will actually go with this. I don't think so. So, and then they looked at each other and they're like, oh, give me back the paper. Like, so I give back the paper, and then they changed it back to the original price and ratified the contract exactly how I wanted that contract ratified. So that understanding of exactly the information is very helpful. But also being able to cooperate. There's another way of actually doing this, of course, is sometimes everything's laid out to you. So to me, that was the easiest thing in the world to actually negotiate, right? What about the more difficult ones, right? What you do is you try to connect, like again, try to connect with the listing agent in terms of collaborating. You know, like being able to go side by side. Let's work this towards a particular goal, right? Collaborate this way. But remember one thing, when you're negotiating, there's a lot of facets that comes into it. And this is one of the things there's been studies on this. Communication is 7% the words that come out of your mouth. And you can look this up. It's actually, you can Google this. 7% of what comes out of your mouth. 35% of your communication is nonverbal. Okay? Between your posture, between your eye contact, between your everything else that you actually do. And then the rest of it, out of the 35%, the rest of it is dealing with the tonation of your voice. Yeah. Imagine if I told you in a very nice way, I hate you. Don't ever come back. Nice that I never know you. I mean, can you imagine? I'm like, but it sounds very positive, right? It sounds very good, the tonation of the voice, right? My facial expression, right? That's communication in itself, you know? And what we don't realize is the importance of this fact, that your way of dealing with things. And I was training one of the agents here at Ameriteam, actually, one of the salespeople. And one of the things that I actually was mentioning is like, you know, when you're on the phone, it's better when you're making phone calls, is to have a mirror in front of you. Just to remind you the other 93% of your communication. Obviously, the facial expression and all that stuff, you cannot express that on the phone, right? I mean, because there's no visual. But if you're looking at yourself in a mirror, right, you know how you're coming across psychologically. And the way you behave psychologically is the way the words and the tonation of the voice comes out naturally. This is a study on what you call this, confidence as well. If you want to be more confident on the phone, right, make sure you're conscientious or you're aware of your posture. If I was going to be making phone calls, usually I actually either stand up or I'm walking around the room. It's just my thing. I mean, you know, it drives my wife crazy actually. When I'm actually walking around, it's like, can you just stay in one place? You're everywhere. But the reason why is because I'm expressing myself in such a way with confidence. And in order for me to be able to do that, I need to be standing up or walking around. This is just my thing. And I sound much better than when I'm laying down. Even people actually can tell, oh, you're in bed. I mean, just the tonation of your voice. Can you imagine? They can tell that you're in bed just because you're actually the tonation of your voice. Because your posture projects
through your how you deliver the message. And that's very important to understand that
you don't come across the right way if you're not, number one, confident, a market expert or an expert in your field, whatever field that is. I mean, we're in real estate obviously, but it could be in any field. If you don't have the right posture. And it's interesting, I went to a seminar about Tony Robbins, and he was talking about that he actually coached Andre Agassi. You know Andre Agassi?
Yeah, Agassi.
Okay, you know Agassi, right?
Yeah.
So he coached Andre Agassi, and one of the things that Agassi came up to him and said, hey, you know what, do your thing. And it's like, you came to me, you're in my home, and you're telling me do my thing? No, the door's out there, walk out. And he's like, no, I'm so sorry. You know, my wife or girlfriend, I think Brooke Shields, I think he was going out with at the time, right? Said to actually come up to you because you're an expert in psychology in terms of how I need to become number one again. Because he ended up number 22nd in the world. So he lost in like 3 or 4 games that he lost, basically matches that he lost, he ended up actually on 22nd place or something like that. And what Tony Robbins did, and at that time apparently it was like VCR, you know, a lot of us don't even know what it is now, right? But of course, I mean, I'm not a dinosaur. So he put in the VCR, and actually he's like, well, go watch this video and tell me what you think. So it was the time that he won the Wimbledon, right? And he's like, oh, that's great. And then he actually like put the video on the time that his last match, and he lost. And he said, okay, can you compare the 2 videos? What was in your head when this video was coming on? You know, the one that he won. He's like, oh, I was coming in that match, that game. I was coming in to the court, and I knew with 100% confidence that I'm gonna beat that person on the other side. I can't remember who it was, but he's like, I can beat this person. And he's like, okay. And what's going on with this other video? And he's like, I don't know. I wasn't sure if I could beat him, So I went into court and, you know, kind of I lost, you know, like the last one. And that's why I'm actually coming up to you and trying to figure out what is going on with me. And he's like, well, do you notice the posture you come in with when you went into the court? See, our physical way of behaving affects our mental way of addressing or communicating. So it's very important for us to be able to communicate in such a way that we have authority in our field, because people will listen when you sound like you know what you're doing.
It's like a respect, yeah.
Correct.
As a receiver, we have to show respect too.
Correct.
Some people is working, some people
Mhm.
doing other things, like they are working and other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's about respect to have you here, yeah. Exactly.
Yes, correct. So if you don't sound confident, don't
What do
expect
you
a
think?
sale.
What do you think? What's his name?
Terry.
Terry,
What's that?
what do you think about what we are talking?
About negotiation?
No, about the way that we are talking about to
Well, when it comes to actually, you know, connecting with other people, you have to have that connection. You have to listen to what their desires and needs are. And sometimes that is verbal, they're gonna tell you that, and sometimes it's something else. But,
Mhm.
yeah.
So essentially, the importance of you being aware of how you behave makes a difference in terms of how you deliver, or how you communicate, or how you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. In Agassi's case, is how to become number one again. When that was pointed out to him, he was on the way to actually, and he became number one in
He also used a lot of modeling, like you find that area where you have success, and then you model that and replicate it. How were you standing at that time? How was your posture?
There you go.
Did you have a smile or a frown on your face?
There
What
you
were you
go.
thinking in your mind? And he modeled that and replicated it.
Mhm.
And that was a lot of Anthony Robbins' tools that he
Yeah,
used.
and it's very effective. It's very effective. That's why he's one of the more successful
motivational speakers of our time.
And one of the things, taking that a step further, is whenever Anthony Robbins will model something, you can model somebody's sales process as well. So if you, for example, you can watch somebody buy something, then you can start to pick up on some of the key aspects of what leads them down that path.
And that's exactly another part of it, because the person I was mentoring with, I had a mentor before. Before I joined him, I had no clue what I was doing. So when I joined him, it made a big difference because I saw exactly how he communicated. I saw exactly how he was able to kind of move transactions forward. And as I was doing that, basically, I started mimicking the way he was doing certain things, and it started working. And then, of course, with your own personality, you can actually like make it your own, and be able to actually make it happen this way. So it's a very, very important piece. If you want your success to happen, you need to constantly improve yourself with successful people already, and that's why, even looking at it in a team scenario, team environment, you got teams out there that just want to crank it, right? But they don't really put enough effort or energy to try to really kind of transfer their skills to the next person. And this is a more important aspect of it. This is something that I've actually always advocated. See, I can sit here, and at the time, actually, before I started doing this 4 years ago, my wife actually came up and was like, why would you like give away all your secrets? I mean, you've been doing this for so long. And no, seriously, I mean, she asked me, and you know what my response was? Well, 90% of those people anyway won't listen. I mean, like, what's the difference, I mean, to the 10% that listen,
They'll have
glad.
good intentions.
Hopefully they're, yeah, exactly. I'm just happy that they actually, for the ones, the 10%, I'm just happy that we're able to pick up the information. Now I made a difference in their lives, right? To me, that's the more important aspect of everything that we do, is how we make a difference in people's lives. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the win-win. Like I told you, the win-win scenario only works when you're towards the end of a transaction, like a negotiation, because you want to kind of like inch that person in, making them feel like something actually accomplished. They accomplished something through the process. So if all the negotiations one-sided, the listing agent doesn't look like he done his job. So you got to make him look good somehow, right? So a lot of the times when I'm talking to the listing agent, I even tell them, hey, listen, thank you so much for kind of working with me on this thing, because I tell you, when I get a chance to talk to your seller, I'm going to tell them how great you are as an agent. And it makes them feel good, even though it hasn't happened yet, right? But then the whole idea that, hey, you know what, you care about me? Like, this is kind of cool.
Expectation up front.
Yeah.
Right. For
Yeah.
the transaction.
Yeah, so it makes them feel like, oh wow, okay, so it puts their guard down a little bit better, kind of more wanting to work with you than another agent is like hounding them and making them look bad and that kind of stuff, Because if one of the things that you have to understand, it's reciprocal. So if you put yourself in their shoes, and this is, by the way, this is how you know when your communication is really, really good, is when you can go into a third-party mode. When I'm talking to, let's say, Terry, right now I'm talking to Terry, and I'm having a conversation with Terry, that conversation, I can already see how he's receiving it. The way I'm delivering it, if I was him, how would I be receiving it? So it's very important to understand that there's a push and pull here, that there's certain things, even, because sometimes we want to, our ego gets in our way, and we want to actually be right? But this is not about right and wrong. This is about getting things done, okay? This is not like, oh, I'm right and you're wrong, so let me prove it to you that you're wrong. It doesn't accomplish what you're trying to do in a negotiation scenario. You want cooperation, not adversarial. Like, you don't want that person to be fighting with you to try to negotiate. You want it as easy as possible for them to actually give you everything you want. So how are you going to do that? You have to be aware
that emotionally you're not draining that person. Emotionally, you're making you're building up that person to want to work with you. And that's how you close more transactions this way. Because when you're competing with 6 to 10 offers with one property, and you're trying to get your buyer to actually get that property, I mean, the only thing that's in between you and 9 other agents is that listing agent. And if that listing agent is really favoring you, oh, believe me, magic happens. Because they just want, it's like, I don't want to deal with this 9 other agents. They're so difficult. I've had situations like this where like they're like so difficult. They're like annoying and hugging. But you, Mark, just make it so easy for me to actually talk to you. You know, we can actually make this, you know, you're willing to work with me on here and here. I was like, great. So it's very important for that connection to happen because that's your gatekeeper, right? The listing agent is your gatekeeper. And on the listing side, right, if it's turned around, what you want to do is make those people also feel important. See, the biggest problem a lot of listing agents have is, and that's why they're not able to sell their homes, is they treat the buyer's agent, just because it's a seller's market, let's say, they treat the buyer agent like dirt, right? But the minute that that buyer agent have an opportunity to get another property for their buyer, they can walk away from your transaction in every excuse in the world, you see? So that's why it's very important to always treat people in a respectable, kind way anytime you can. And if it's gonna be a scenario that you're trying to prove yourself right, you gotta check your ego, because sometimes I run into that situation sometimes.
Also,
Yeah.
checking your ego is very crucial when you're communicating with other agents, because other agents will be too quick, and this is a lesson to be learned, too quick to get fired up or defensive about something that another agent says to you. So recently I was doing a transaction coordination on
Yeah.
an agent's deal, and there was a lead disclosure that's federally required.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent the agent a message and said, we need that lead disclosure signed by your seller, because it's legally required, and we need to get it signed by the buyer as well, but we need that signed, it's required. And I sent the message. Of course, realtors they don't talk on the phone, don't check emails, don't check text, so they wonder why they don't know what's going on. But in this case, what we did was I went ahead and contacted him several times, text, email, hey, we still need that lead disclosure. I get on the phone with him and I simply stated, we need that lead disclosure, it's required. He got all defensive. I know what, I've been doing this and I was like, okay, you seem a little defensive. Right now, we just need
I see a little defensive.
we just need a document that's required. So that's all I was requesting. We were just trying to get things moving forward, which I'm sure we all want.
So what ended up happening?
About 20 minutes later, I get a phone call and apology. Once he thought about what was going on, what the conversation was about, and he was like, look, I was taking this from the point of view that you were trying to tell me what to do, and in the reality, you were just trying to get the document that you needed. I said, awesome, wonderful. It says a lot about you to call me back and apologize. That's
There you
awesome. Let's get this thing closed, and we
Yeah.
did. We got it closed. But sometimes part of the matching and the pacing, you also have to pace them and then lead a little bit. So what I did during that conversation to build a little bit of that rapport was, once he got a little defensive, I raised myself up to that level, and then I brought it back down. So in other words, I went there, close to that, not as aggravated.
So you're very, very aware.
But you gotta meet it, pace it, and then lead them back down there. Because otherwise he wouldn't have heard. And even though it took him about 20 minutes to process what was being said, and I wouldn't doubt he maybe talked to a couple people and they said, yeah, you probably need to, get that done. But everybody at the end of the day, the buyer wants to buy the house, the seller wants to sell the house, the listing agent wants to sell the house, the buying agent wants to buy it. Everybody wants to win. Ego's got to get checked at the door. And
Something else, something additional.
Yeah.
That for sure is not gonna be the only transaction that you're gonna see this guy.
Mhm.
So probably in the future, this is small work, so you're gonna see the guy again, so you
And
need to
you
have
do.
your ego.
And
I
you
can tell
do.
you, I
You
can
do.
tell you,
Yeah.
I've done many deals in the 30 years that I've been doing this. I see a lot of the same faces because the producers, they're out there and you see them again.
Mhm.
Now, there's those agents who only show up every once in a while on one transaction, you never see them again.
Mm.
But the ones that are doing transactions, y'all gotta, everybody has to play nice and be professional, build rapport, and try to get to that win-win scenario.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, the next one that we're gonna talk about is establish a mutually agreed upon standard for evaluating the solutions. So this is the cooperation part, because it's very important, once you connect with the people that you're dealing with, you need to actually get them to kind of go along with you in regards to the journey of actually getting this thing ratified. There's some commonality that we all have with the listing agent, or commonality we have with the buyer's agent if you're the listing agent, right? The commonality that we're looking at is we want to have a transaction to close, right? I mean, it's a very common, it's a very good common scenario that we have, right? It's just a question of how, what works for the seller, what works for the buyer. So when we're talking about this kind of thing, we want to make sure that we address these things, all these little nuances that were just like what you were talking about, like the disclosure and stuff. Now, it's also a matter of approach, right? I mean, I'm glad that guy noticed it, that, he was being very defensive, which is kind of interesting because what I normally would do is I would actually use this cooperation, collaboration kind of thing. But like you said, the person doesn't answer texts, doesn't answer emails, doesn't actually answer calls. I mean, and you finally get to talk to them, you're probably like, okay, well, is this guy still working? Like, right? So.
And it would have been different if I had approached that phone call with, hey, I've been in this business for 30 years, you need to get your crap together, youngin', If I would have started the conversation, that wasn't what happened,
Yeah, exactly,
And-
exactly.
Yeah, and one of the, as far as mutually agreed upon the process, if ever I run into a roadblock where they say, oh, I don't think this one's gonna close, or we can't do this, I always ask the question, what would it look like if we could? What would be the scenario that we
Yeah.
could get to our, or overcome this roadblock, or
Mhm.
pass this situation? What would it look like if we could? And more often than not, in that experience
Mhm.
that I have, that's actually what led to the solution was, hey, there's always a way, we gotta solve it with a signature,
Mhm.
agreement, time, or a combination of those items, and we can fix this.
Mhm.
True.
Yeah, exactly. So our natural human behavior, we need to actually kind of go through this real quick, okay? People are not rational beings because we're not robots and we're not animals, okay?
Reaction.
Animals is the one extreme, the robots are the other extreme, right? Logical, illogical. Emotions are not logical. Yeah, we have emotions in our, or at least most of us do, have emotions that goes along with the way we do business. And your success really relies on being able to control that emotions. That's the difference between us and animals. If you're looking at animals, they don't have intelligence like the way human beings do. They do have intelligence to a certain capacity of what they can solve or whatever, but human beings, we can choose our reactions to things. So based on that, basically, we can choose how we're gonna behave in certain situations, whether you wanna take it up a notch, or like make sure that you don't go over the top with the person that you're dealing with, right? So you know exactly where the balance is on your tonality of your voice, your expression, and the way you would wanna actually deliver the message. So it makes a big difference, like you said, that you didn't go over top of him. You just kind of like, almost there, not even close. But it allowed him to actually realize that there was something wrong that he was doing. And I've had that situation where someone actually blurts out like, oh, you're this and you're this and you're this. Like, okay, I didn't know that's how you felt. I was like, I even acknowledged okay, I didn't know that's how you felt. If that's how you felt, I'm sorry. I apologize that you feel this way, right? I apologize that you feel this way. I don't apologize.
I noticed you didn't take that on.
No,
You left it
feel
over
the same.
here.
Yeah, I left it over there because I wouldn't. Why would I take the responsibility of your feelings, right?
About your problems, exactly.
Yeah,
So,
you have issues? Okay, great. You know what? I apologize that you have those issues, right? I mean, remember, everybody's problem doesn't have to become yours. That's my point, right? So this is where everything comes in. The emotional side of us needs to be controlled in order for you to actually have a certain amount of success in this field. Because if you don't, right, you're gonna lose a lot of clients.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you're gonna lose a lot of
I
clients.
applied
Yeah.
that strategy when I was showing properties. I was a realtor, because you try to convince your client that this is the right house at the beginning, right? So
Yeah,
when I just got my license, I was thinking that, this is a wow, beautiful house. No, that was my first mistake. That was my first mistake, because you don't put your emotion, because this is a business. This is a business transaction. So I learned how to leave my emotion on the side. And,
yeah. Here's another fact, okay? We are influenced by our own biases. The way we were raised, the way we look at the world. See, you and I can tell you right now, if we were looking at certain situations, you would react differently. You could react differently. You could make decisions differently. So I cannot assume just because I am who I am that you are like me. And a lot of people do this. It's like, oh, you know, my wife was like this, but she doesn't listen to me. But I listen to her. I'm like, well,
Okay.
that's okay. I mean, you're two different people.
So you can add biases and experiences, because those lead to the biases.
Yeah, the experiences. Well, that's part of it, right? There's a lot of different factors.
Other,
Yeah, other ones that and we can name this thing all day long. But the whole point is, all of us are actually have our own different experience of life, right? With that in mind, right, you have to make sure that you are aware of those biases that you're dealing with the other person, right, and how they perceive the world. Because if a person, and I had, like I told you, I think I mentioned it one time, I had this one client that one of my agents quit and one of my loan officers quit because of it. And this client was so difficult that my wife was asking me, can you even close this one? I'm like, yeah, of course. This is the easier client that I get to deal with. And she's like, why is that? Because he's so predictable. I know exactly how he's gonna behave. I know exactly. So all I need to do is look at it and create my reactions based on his behavior. So when he's stepping over the line, I treat him like a child. And he behaves exactly like a child, and he reacts like a child, and it works very well. The economy, our relationship was so good at this. When I sold him this $1.6 million house, when he was done buying the house, basically, we're still in touch to this day. And he's the one reaching out to me like, hey, you should see the tennis court. Come over sometime, Mark, It's so good, I need your opinion on I'm like, great. And the reason why he has that relationship with me is because I look at him and I see certain way of the way he's looking at the world, and I understand where he's coming from. I understand that he grew up a certain way, and and I got to know him that way. So with that in mind, I'm cognizant of where the triggers are, and that's very, very important, guys. Triggers. When you trigger a person, after you trigger them, they probably cannot hear you for at least a good
And it could be things
5 to 10 minutes. Things that you wasn't even aware of, right?
they may not even be aware of. They
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah, they knew they got triggered, right?
You did something that they'd experienced even as a child or something.
Yeah.
You said a word or approach them in a different way,
Yeah,
and it sets them off, and they don't even realize they got that trigger.
exactly. So it's very important for you to actually see this whole picture, right?
State change.
So their perception of the world is a very important aspect of this. And then we are looking at feelings and emotion that justify illogical emotional behavior. And these people, the same people that we're talking about, actually have emotions that is not even logical when they're making decisions, right? And this is where we come into our guidance. That's where our guidance come in, right? I prefer to have them experience what it's like not getting contracts. Why? Because they can turn around and say, oh, later on and say, oh, you actually told me I should buy it for this price. And look, all the properties came down. You want a liability? Give your opinion. I told him my opinion doesn't count. You still want to hear it? What do you mean your opinion? You're an market expert, of course.
Yes.
But you're still gonna make a decision. Are you planning on adopting me and moving me for free at your house? Because then my opinion will count at that point. Because I want to live in a nice place too, you know. But outside of that, my opinion doesn't count. And it's very important for your clients to understand. And I make that disclaimer that my opinion doesn't count. It really doesn't. It's only their decisions that matter. And my job is like a tour guide. You don't know the city? Let me show you. This street goes here, the street goes there, and there's like at the end of the street you make a right, there's where the church is. I give you information so that you can make the decision.
Yeah.
I don't tell you what to do. This is the biggest difference. Let them make their decisions. And by the way, the ones that go all the way to settlement every single time, are the ones that are decided by the client itself that they want to go to closing. Not you telling them, yeah, that you need to go to closing, or you need to actually like this, you need to put this offer at this amount. And I've seen agents doing this, and I'm like, I mean, talk about liability for me. I mean, like, I don't need to actually be part of that.
Nope.
So, and another thing is, we're attracted to not losing out. You know, the FOMO, fear of losing out. How do you call that? FOMO? Missing out, yeah. Fear of missing out. We have a natural tendency of having fear of missing out. It's the same idea that it comes from our instinctual scenario of survival. It's the whole idea that we look at the negative, worst case scenarios rather than like the best case scenarios. We have a tendency of actually, out of 10 things a person does, they do one bad thing and you remember that bad thing. But you don't really pay attention to the good things. And it's natural for us to be this way. It's just the way we are wired. That's part of the whole survival of the fittest, or the survival of the adaptable. That's why human beings are still on Earth. You know.
Taking it back to Anthony Robbins, he would say we will do more to avoid pain than we will to gain pleasure.
Thank you. That's exactly. It's natural. This is our natural behaviors. And understanding this is very important because these are push and pulls. These are push and pulls. The only motivations people have, it only boils down to two. Pain or pleasure. Just like what he said. I like to motivate people on the pleasure side rather than on the pain side. Because on the pain side, it's a negative motivation, but it's necessary at times. But most of the time, it can get into the realm of like being
Well, the answer
a
is
cheesy, a cheesy salesperson. Because if you think about this, the cheesy salesperson, or the one that you don't want to actually be around with, are the ones that are actually telling you, oh, you need. So to me, I mean, even though I got my life insurance license, I don't see myself selling it yet. Mainly because I'm looking at that and I'm thinking like, okay, so you're actually selling the idea of what happens if you die,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So to me,
That's
it's not like a
exactly
very exciting thing. It's like selling cemetery plots, which people are doing that, and or like selling those coffin stuff,
Yeah.
selling coffins. I mean, it could be a very profitable thing. I mean, go ahead.
I have an example of pain and pleasure and trying to stay on the positive side and using it in a real life scenario. So have you ever heard of the puppy dog close?
No, but
So
it sounds pretty sleazy.
So the puppy dog
Already.
close, well, I mean, it's a real technique and it
Yeah,
works, and
it
it's
works.
useful if you understand it, but it's a positive thing as well. So I'll use an example of when we were buying a car. This is in the old days. There was a company called Saturn. Do you remember the
Oh
car
yeah,
company called
yeah,
Saturn?
Saturn, yeah.
They made some wonderful cars, but they went belly up during the financial crisis. and
Yeah, I
things
remember
like
that.
But one of the things that the salesman used is when you're going and looking at a house or a car or something like that, if you can have them put themselves in it physically and mentally. For example, here's the keys to the car you're looking at that you test drove today. Go ahead and take it for the weekend. And this is a real life example. Is we took that car for the weekend. The fear of missing out was that when it was time to bring it back, we would no longer have that car. So now we lose it, but it's a positive, it's done in a positive light because we're trying to avoid the loss and gain the pleasure of having that item. And you can actually do that with a house by
Yeah.
finding out what they want in a home and pointing out those things. Don't make decisions for them, but point out what this has to do with what they said they wanted. You know, you said you wanted a 3-bedroom, this one has 4. Is that enough? Is it too much? You know, do you like the way this one's laid out? You know, those kind of things. Do you see your kids in this house? That starts to put the puppy dog clothes in there, where you put their mind.
So you're putting
in it.
the emotional, imagery of what it would look like. So
And-
it
and
is
so-
actually a positive. It is a positive motivation, right? Getting them to write actually create deadlines. Like, hey, it's gonna need to be presented by Monday.
Now, would you be okay if we left this house today, didn't write an offer, you said you wanted to think about it? If we walk out of here today and we don't write an offer on this, are you okay with somebody else writing an offer and taking this home?
Yeah.
And them living in this house instead of you and your children? That would be fear of missing out.
Yeah. So that's actually a natural thing that we have. And then another thing that we gotta pay attention to. We are influenced by our emotions, especially when you know the client is a blue, a person that actually touches your emotions. So our emotions creates the logical aspect of the kind of stuff that we sell, a home. And just like the way he explained it, like, can you see your children running around here? So you're looking at like, you're giving imagery, right? And the purpose of that really is to create that environment of pulling that emotional thing so that they can logically make the decision. So people look at it in terms of their decisions a lot of the times on the emotional side, and then the logic comes in afterwards. Unless they're looking at investment property, even some investors are still like this, but you know, for me, when you're looking at investments, all numbers and cents and statistics, you know, you gotta be touching off on your green. By the way, all of us have all 4 personality types, right? Only difference is to what degree, what extent. So for certain people, I mean, you know, you have to actually look at it, for me at least, if you're looking at investment, it's strictly numbers and cents. That's all you're looking at. There's nothing, because you're not buying or living in a house and, you know, like doing all these things, unless you have a different purpose why you're buying. But as an investor, you're looking at profit. Hopefully that's what you're looking at. It's the only thing that you should be looking at, and how you make the profit, right? So that's the reason why you have to understand where psychology comes in, and then you cater that way of speaking, cater the way you present the ideas or whatever you're trying to present to them in such a way that they would start moving it along and doing something about it. But this is a very critical part of our business that people don't realize. If you're able to get people literally from the street that never bought a house, right? And implant ideas for them to buy a house, which I've done many times. I create my own market. People don't realize you're not looking for people that are already looking to buy or sell a house. You're looking for a lot of people that you influence that they would want to buy or sell a house. And before they even think about buying or selling a house, you're already connected to them, so you're the only person they're coming up to. You have no competition. I sell houses like this all day long. You plant seeds in people's minds. You create imagery, create vision, right? And with that vision, it creates opportunities for them to make it grow in their head. It's the most wonderful thing in the world. I don't go out there actually like cold calling. I mean, I don't remember even the last time I did that. But I go out there, like I was at the airport, met some people that actually happen to be speaking my language, and I started talking to them, they happen to be in my neighborhood, in the same city, and they happen to not own a house. Let's stay in touch. So what I do is I create a social setting where I can meet them, not a professional setting, it's a social setting, social environment, because every person that you meet is a referral source. This is how you need to start thinking about your business. And to this day, I mean, I still sell a lot of houses. I mean, look at my historic numbers is very consistent. I mean, constantly making six-figure income in real estate for the past 30 years, consistently. And the reason why is not because I have all these great marketing ideas. No, I developed a way of being able to plant in people's minds and develop that into something that they would want to do something about. Big difference. So there's two thought process, I think, in the system. System one is instinctive mind and a logical mind. So you have to actually see how those thought process works. And let me tell you, instinctive is similar to that emotional side of it, right? That you can trigger people to actually move. And then on the logical mind scenario, I mean, if you're looking at investors, most of them are going to be thinking logical, not instinctive. Most of them, the ones that are successful. The ones that are not
That
successful.
part I would agree with, the ones that are successful long-term.
Long term, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's natural for people
to kind of still go that direction, but long term they don't succeed.
Well,
I mean, investors don't
System
succeed.
2, the logical mind, is taking out FOMO.
Yeah,
If you take out FOMO, now you have the logical mind.
yeah, isn't that great? It's actually even better because that's the reason I was telling you, like, you know, those cheesy salesperson approach to me actually works only to a certain degree. You know why? Because when things hit the fan, right, that client is looking at you like, really, I missed out on this thing? I don't think I want to work with you in the future. I mean, you know, that's the reason why I'm actually more on the looking at it from like the way you expressed it, where, you know, can you see your kids growing up here, da 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 da. I normally don't push on that fear of missing out part, just because to me, I don't want them to feel like pressured. And some people do get pressured with that, you know, like they don't know, like, oh, I don't want to make a decision right this minute just because we're going to lose that. Well, I thought, well, hey, there's other houses, it's okay. You know, I'm your advocate, remember, I'm your tour guide. You know, so it's okay. Just relax. It's gonna happen. You know, so and it happens. I mean, you know, most of the client that I work with, they buy a house. I mean, their daughter bought houses with me, and then now their granddaughter and their grandchildren are buying houses with me. And like, I'm on the 3rd generation now. I mean, it'll stay a little longer. I'll be on my 4th. I don't know. So yeah, successful negotiation is a dynamic, emotional, intelligent process actually, but it's a constantly moving kind of scenario, and the reason why is because we have certain things are predictable, but emotions are not predictable. So that's the reason why it's.
Derek, you mentioned something when the other guy was calling you, like to apologize before, so you have the balance in your voice. So you don't go that way to keep the balance. I think this is the key to starting. I mean, keep the balance.
Yeah, I could have made that a worse situation by not using some emotional intelligence in that situation.
Absolutely.
I could have amped it up. Now, in that case, in that situation, I was acting as a transaction coordinator for an agent. So I didn't want to destroy her deal.
Therefore, actually destroy you.
Well, and I mean, if I go back in time, my conversation never said, I've got 30 years experience. Because I'm acting as a I'm just trying to move things forward, check boxes. And so that's how I came at it. I was matter of fact, and I allowed him to check his emotional intelligence later. His ego wasn't my problem.
Yeah, but for him, he needs to calm down,
Yep.
take a pause, and then give a call.
Yeah.
But that was good for him.
That's a technique in itself. Actually,
And I also had the foresight to know one way or the other, we're gonna end up with the lead disclosure sign because it has to be. It's just these agents just won't get their commission check yet.
Exactly.
So-
Exactly.
So
Sorry.
we're also looking at Speaking of that part, looking at it from a non-violent communication, which is, let's segue to this, and the reason why is a lot of the times we have a tendency of pointing out what people do. And when we do that, exactly what happens? Walls come up. If you want the best way to communicate and have a negotiated transaction that goes your direction, your way, like Burger King, your way, goes your way, then you're gonna need to make sure that you don't trigger the person or offend the person, right? And in that scenario, I think you didn't have to do anything. He was just triggered by anything that actually called him that day, probably.
Yeah, but that's a good point though. I don't know what happened to him 10 minutes before I called.
Exactly.
So I can't respond to him in the exact same way that he did because I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know.
It's not your
And
fault.
that's very important actually. Even on, there's like a lot of road rages actually happening out there, and people get killed sometimes over this. And I don't even understand why people engage in these things. Like a week ago, when I was driving this, I was trying to turn my signal on to go left or whatever, right? And there was a car right next to me, so I had to slow down and wait for him to come, and then and the person behind me was so mad because he's like, "You're slowing down in the middle of the road." Well, I'm trying to turn. That's why I have to slow down and wait for this person to come through, right? So, of course, with no explanation, because you're not going to be able to explain anything to irate people. And he started yelling and screaming and drove by and, gave his finger or whatever. And I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
Because we choose our reaction to these
Zero
things.
need to respond.
No, zero need to respond. And then another time, I actually had a situation where the same thing happened. I made a U-turn. I was gonna go all the way on the right, so I started turning on my signal lights. Instead of this person slowing down, knowing the fact that I was turning, he sped up, right? Well, I was actually slowly going into the lane, right? And he started hanging the horn, and then basically as I was turning, it slowed down in the front of me, so we slowed down. This guy got out of the car. He got out of the car. I was like, oh, okay. And I just kept making all right and just walked away. And then the guy is in the middle of the road looking looking terrible, I guess that's it. And the point I'm trying to make to you is, people have issues. It doesn't have to become yours. That's the whole point, And the nonviolent communication part is very crucial. This is a life changer for me. If you guys ever get a chance to listen to Marshall Rosenberg talk, I don't know if you've ever heard this guy. He died in 2015, but I've listened to his seminars 3 hours. They had a 3-hour seminar one time, and I've listened to it 3, 4, 5 times. Started applying the concepts in it, and I'm telling you, it helps on the negotiation as well because you don't get to trigger people because you know exactly how you can keep everything objectively. Sometimes we have a tendency of creating issues when we give our opinions or what we think about the person. And it makes people very upset when you actually point out to them their own deficiency, right? Especially if you point it out in front of a lot of people, right? Because we have our own egos.
You expose.
Yeah, you expose that person to be deficient on something, right? So it becomes like a boomerang. The same person, if you know how to actually do this nonviolent communication, will look like a horrible person in front of everybody without you actually reacting to it. And when you're negotiating a transaction, it's very helpful to get any advantages psychologically with the person that you're dealing with. You were talking about mirroring. It's kind of interesting. You have a situation where a person tells you something very insulting or whatever, right? What I do sometimes, I repeat it back to them. You mean to say, and then I repeat exactly what they just said to me, right? And of course, the person looks at it gets a little embarrassed because like, oh my gosh, it sounded that bad.
Like I did say that, didn't I? Ooh.
It's like a mirror.
Yeah, like a mirror. And when when you put them in that kind of position, they feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. In their mind, I'm so sorry already. Well, guess what? You're so sorry. Let's make it up with like, getting my stuff to push forward. So any advantages that you have psychologically will
That's a
allow
good
you to.
de-escalation technique.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's not something that you point out objectively. Everything that, if you want a communication that never turns into arguments, because I don't know if you guys run into, especially with relationships, or have, relationships is very key in our business, right? So the more relationships you have, the more probably you're going to close a transaction at some point. It's just statistically there. Now, the only question is, are you statistically, can you statistically make it happen that way? Because we are our own enemies, worse sometimes, when we cut off relationships because the person behaves a certain way. We don't need to cut off relationships. You can leave it open. Maybe close to you because you don't want to have to actually deal with that person, but it has to be open for them. And in a negotiating scenario, it's always nice because I have a scenario right now. The person's going to buy a home with me, and years back she ended up buying with someone else because at the time her husband actually had another agent, and I showed that same property. I showed the property first, actually. I should have gotten paid for it, right? I let it go. But I stayed in touch with her. Years later, she ended up renting out her property, and now actually finding the tenant for the property. And then now years later, she's looking to buy 2 houses from me. You see, even though I was like feeling like, oh my gosh, I spent all this time and this person just kind of shoved me aside, that kind of thing. And some people would just like forget about you. I kept in touch with her. And now we're actually doing a business together. This is my point. When you're in a negotiating scenario, you don't know when you're going to meet that listing agent again. Keep the doors open, because that happens in a scenario where it comes back around and they're like, okay, I now have to actually negotiate something with this person. Like, 10 times more difficult.
I think it's also important that we connect the dots and understand that we're actually always negotiating. There's tiny negotiations, and then there's obviously these obvious, hey, I got a sales contract on the table, we're negotiating.
Yeah.
But you're also negotiating every interaction, every communication that you have with somebody. There's tiny negotiations.
You know what, Derry, something that you say is makes sense, because we as a salesperson, we are for sale all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm selling myself, I'm selling my image, I'm selling the trust. You as a listing agent, I want to take trust on you that you're gonna give me the property that I want to buy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important to leave it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You have an image, and imagine that you need to protect.
Yeah, you have an image to protect, absolutely. So that in itself. So the other part that we're talking about is, being empathetic and communicate and understanding the other party. You have to be able to communicate in such a way that you understand where they're coming from. Because and sometimes I do this when I'm negotiating with somebody, I mention to them, it must be, I've been in your kind of situation. It feels like, it gets it a little bit more difficult when your seller is going through this or whatever. It's like, yeah, I know. And I'm, that's exactly how I'm feeling, right? So I kind of point out how I would feel, that more than likely they feel that way. That's like showing empathy in that sense, right? So that agent kind of starting to kind of like, especially if the seller's difficult, the agent become my friend. I've transactions like that happen, and actually I even have one that my buyer didn't show up at closing. We were at the loan's done, everything, paperwork's at the settlement table, buyer doesn't show up. Can you imagine how irate the listing agent is, that they waited a month to go to closing, and we go to closing, the buyer doesn't want to show up at closing.
Why?
Because their mother-in-law moved in, and they decided they want to get a bigger place. So take my deposit, they said. And guess what? I was such a good person with that listing agent. We became buddies.
became close.
You experience that together.
Yeah,
You-
exactly.
you-
Instead
you-
of actually having him blame me or blame, no,
You both lost.
we
that
both
day.
lost in that day. Yeah, and now we got something.
And finding that empathy with each other is look, you know, yes, it was your buyer, but you couldn't control what they did. The two of you came together with that.
With that, because exactly how you negotiate your transactions make a difference, right? So the emotional position, that's exactly what I just mentioned, right? And nonviolent words. To me, in our field, deals in front of your clients is one of the worst things that you can say. And we sometimes say those things, like, I got a deal. I call it transactions. Soften it up. There's certain words that you're gonna need to use to soften things up. Yeah, it makes a big difference. I look at myself as a consultant. I don't look at myself as a salesperson. Okay, I'm not selling you a house. I'm your consultant. Why? Because you just don't talk to me about the house. You talk to me about your goals. You talk to me about your dreams. You talk to me. I mean, I even have clients that talk to me about how to solve their marital issues. You know, so I mean, you know, I'm a
It's
friend.
who's your audience?
Yeah,
You know, who's your audience? Now, if it were a buyer, softer words.
yes.
If it were an investor, deal might make more sense to them in that
Because-
in
In certain
some of
context,
them.
to certain context.
Because they're looking for a deal. That's their primary
yeah.
purpose.
Mhm.
So that word might
But
work
remember,
there, but
because-
not with a buyer or regular buyer.
Because you're looking at, like, again, logical versus emotional, right? So you don't want to actually like come across too logical to someone who actually has their emotions out there, because then you look like a cheesy salesperson to them. And the worst compliment you'll ever have in this business is when someone tells you, "Oh, you're a good salesperson." That's the worst. Because a good salesperson, you wouldn't even know they sold you one. Okay?
Because what?
You wouldn't even know that you sold them a house. You wouldn't even know that you actually got sold to.
They
sold
should
into.
feel like you did it together. That's really what
Exactly. Like collaboration, right? That's the whole idea. Like the other day, I actually have a client, and my client's like, "How come this property didn't pop up on the list that search that you did for me?" I was like, "Well, it didn't. How come it didn't?" So I looked it up. It's not even on the market yet. Oh, okay. Because I want to make sure that we're not missing out on anything. I was like, you don't remember that you and I did this together to do the search? That's why I do searches together with my clients. I Zoom with them, and I share my screen, and then we start looking at the property together, so that they cannot say to me, "Oh, well, how come you didn't send me the property? The other agent sent me property."
What are you hiding from me? Well, they probably didn't actually listen to what you said. when you said you didn't want to spend
Like
over
that.
$400,000, I
And
was
then-
listening to you.
No, it's so funny, but that's true though, in that sense, because you got them involved in the process, right? So that same client actually asked me, he's like, "Well, I want to change the criteria." Okay, great. Let's go ahead and sit down and we'll go through and change the criteria. "Oh, I don't need to be there." I'm like, "Wait a minute. You just told me that why these certain things are not popping up. Don't you want to actually see exactly how the search is done?" "Oh, okay. I'll go ahead and do that." So that's what we did yesterday. So these are the kind of things that you have to be aware of when you're dealing with your clients. Deal with them like a consultant. Don't deal with them like a salesperson. You know, a salesperson will just send them properties. A consultant will actually kind of go side by
Yeah.
side with them.
A salesperson is the quickest way to end anything with me. I'm just like,
Yeah.
if I feel like you're, you know, all salesy, it's nope.
Yeah.
It doesn't
I
matter
like
what it
that.
is.
I like that to be consultant.
Yeah.
You know, it's-
Oh yeah.
I've literally
He's an
been in a
expert.
place where I was gonna spend
Market
money
expert. Yeah.
and stopped and walked over to a different person that seemed like they were more down to earth. Left a salesperson that was trying to work with me and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm actually gonna go over here." I've literally done that at a store before.
So essentially, this is what we're talking about: cooperative problem solving. Both of you actually kind of get them involved, even on the listing side or when you're dealing with your seller, get them involved, because what they don't see is what they don't know, and then all of a sudden they might see something that doesn't look right because someone's feeding them information.
I also use we, us in the conversations with
correct.
them as well, rather than I think.
Mm.
You know, I would try to turn that into, you know, as we're looking through this, you know, one of the possible options that we could consider is such and such.
It's
And,
empathy.
you know, try to,
It's empathy.
try to put those words in there.
So, and that's basically the way I look at the world. See, clients are influenced emotionally and decisions are justified with logic afterwards. This is like the basic of our business. This is real estate. Now, car sales, if they walk out the door, you probably won't sell them a car. In most cases. Do you agree?
Yeah.
That's
Why they call them a be back, because they won't be back, but they call them be back.
be back.
That's a true term, a be back.
Okay. Master of negotiation. Get over aversion to negotiate, right? Play emotional game of society. The whole society, when you're looking at, have we passed another 10 minutes, right? We're almost done.
No, I was just glancing up to see what time it was. I wasn't
Is that the
checking-
right time?
I wasn't checking your time.
So, yeah, basically, you don't need to play the emotional game of being able to move people in the direction. What you need to do is be able to actually connect with them, like I said, cooperatively and do this together. So it's a different approach than what you would normally say. Because when you're looking at a car salesperson, right, or even a timeshare presenter, right, they tend to actually like have to close you today or there's nothing. It's like a feast or famine. So it's about them, it's not about your client. When you're looking at the client on a clientele perspective, you always keep everything more connected emotionally, like they're part of a family, of your family. So on my events, I always invite my clients, just because, hey, my son's turning 2 on Saturday, can you come? I'm actually making calls like this right now, right? So you gotta actually, so when you're looking at it from negotiating later on, the more you have banked emotionally with that person, the more they're gonna pay attention and listen to you.
It's also your number 2 point there, the creating a relationship with your adversary.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
They could be, you know, that could, include any of the parties of the
Yeah.
transaction.
Absolutely.
Who's
Is-
considered adversary? Who is the adversary? Your competence?
Your own client could be an adversary.
Your
An
competence?
adversary.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're really not that good at what you do, that's probably what's gonna happen. You need to actually make them your ally, or like you're their advisor in that sense, right?
Yeah, I've had much more luck whenever whenever I'm trying to follow up with leads and whatnot, whenever I'm put myself on their side
Ah.
rather than adversarial. So
Correct.
the word adversary is up there, but I think it's how you approach it and
Yes.
soften the relationship is whether they're gonna remain an adversary or not.
Do you went through those situations that you have your clients say, I like this house, this is what I like, this is the location that I want, this is the price, everything is fit to my work, etc. But the wife, no, I don't like it. And that
Well,
could be
because
an
the wife is not
adversary.
getting enough attention.
Could be
also.
adversary, could be an adversary.
Yeah, no, it is an adversary because you haven't won the wife over yet. Like, that's usually what I would do. I would actually like also put some energy and effort into winning the wife, especially depending on the culture. Sometimes the wife is the one
I was
driving
gonna say,
it.
whoever
Sometimes-
takes care of the home,
Yeah.
you should be paying attention to.
Exactly.
Pay attention to how the dynamic works. I mean, in different cultures, they have different traditions and they have different ways of family, like how the family actually interact with each other. So,
Yeah, and it's not always man and woman.
Yeah.
It's who takes care of the house
Mhm.
and who takes care of the finances. And you're going to talk to those two differently.
oh yeah,
You know, you're gonna mix and mingle some of the conversations so that both of them get what they need out of that.
So active listening, mirroring, we talked about that. Oh, silences. I talked to you about silence is actually one of the best tools you can use for negotiation. You know, when things have been said and things have been laid out, you
Shut
just
up!
keep it quiet at that point.
Shut
Yeah.
up!
At that point, you just keep everything quiet until the other party actually kind of calls it out.
That should
voice.
be in bold up there,
Oh yeah,
because that,
it's
there's a lot of rapport building in this,
Yeah.
but that comment right there,
Mhm.
silence, should be bold, because too many people don't realize how powerful silence is.
Silence actually ends up commanding respect in that sense. You know, sometimes
Like
the
a
less you
wise
say,
guy.
the more
Wise
effective you
guy,
become.
just do
Yeah.
the silence, you know, you're wise, you stay quiet, so you're analyzing, so you don't give
Yes.
your personal opinion, etc.
And you don't give away the farm. I mean, you don't like give away all the information that the other party can actually use now. So that's very important. Tactical empathy. This is actually like, why is it tactical? Is because you don't, you wanna, even if that's not your personality, right? Try to actually kind of use it at the right moment, right? It's very important. And validating and understanding to gain trust. You have to actually kind of validate people, really understand where they're coming from. Sometimes you have to repeat where they're coming from. The positive and the negative, you can see, sometimes people are not able to actually kind of hear themselves when they talk. So you do one of those things. So, and position audit. So as you go through the negotiation, kind of probe around sometimes. You're gonna need to ask where you are if you haven't figured things out, just to kind of like understand how much further you are from the finish line.
Okay.
So that's called the position auditing, right? I mean, like where you are in that negotiation. Affirmation of the other party. That's self-explanatory. Place yourself in
Build
the
them
other
up, don't
person's
tear
shoes.
them down.
Yeah, build them up, exactly. Let them make their own decisions, but with your influence. This is really good. This is actually a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini. Very good book. Very good book that can help you.
What's the name?
Influence.
Influence.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think you brought that one up on almost every time you've been here.
Yeah, because it's so useful.
That's
A lot of
Can you
different.
give an
It's very
example?
powerful.
Can you give an example about
For the
affirmation of the party?
yeah, make them with your influence.
No, when you're doing an affirmation of the other party.
Oh, affirmation, like you actually like let the person know, especially with sometimes when we're even at settlement, I let their client know, it's their client anyway, right? I let their client know how well and professional the agent that they hired, how well they did. And the reason why I want to do that is because if this person lists a lot of properties, right, and I come across him again, he would pick my contract over any other agent because he knows he's gonna look good at the end. So you're creating a precedent, like where the listing agent is already having bias towards you.
You are a pleasure to work with.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a confirmation, yeah.
Yes.
You could also, if it was let's say a buyer, and you could say, you've made a good decision with this,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Or let's just say you're in the middle of negotiation and you can't really tell them how much they should be offering, but you give them some guidance and then they make a decision.
It's like, yeah, it's a great decision. That looks like-
Affirmation of the other
yeah,
party
that looks great. Yeah, you did a
that
good
sounds like a
job.
great idea. Let's put
Well,
it
like you
right
did a
this
great
way.
job actually, putting this together. Let me make it close on my end now.
I agree.
Yeah. So whenever you get an opportunity to bank goodwill or like positive emotional bank deposit to the person you're talking to, they more than likely listen to you. And let me explain to you how important this is, because there's people out there that tell me, oh, my wife doesn't listen to me, blah 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 blah, and then another 10 minutes until we'll be finished. Yeah, it's almost done.
So you have to be at the airport 3:30, right?
Yeah, we have time. 12:30. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna have a meeting after this. So yeah, and then create a sense of urgency, and not accepting your offer feels like a loss to them. So that's another thing when you're negotiating on the listing side, kind of make sure that you kind of move the transaction along, and you're always in touch. If you're consistently calling the agent, and then you tell them when you're gonna make the next call again, this is very important to actually do, because
a lot of the agents, they just send the offer and then hopefully it
Yeah.
sticks, you know, and you don't want to be this way. Keys to a successful negotiation: prepare yourself by researching the other party. Know who you are dealing with, okay? Know who you're negotiating with. This is important. I think I explained to you about the story earlier, right? Understand the other party's position, the why behind their objection. Be a good listener and know that silence is a powerful negotiation tool, okay? Know your objective and understand how it can be a benefit to the other party emotionally. And always stay calm and polite through the negotiation. Warm voice. Warm voice. Why? Because people to respond better with warm
Yeah.
voice. It doesn't become adversarial in that sense, you know? And being polite to me is not enough people out there that does this. And believe me, it's a huge, huge difference for me when people actually work with me because I'm respectful of them and they kind of like it. The people want to be around me this way. And appeal to the other party's emotional state of being. Okay? And let the other party come to their conclusion. So always try to, put it this way, try to make sure people are making their own decisions on everything that you're doing because it backfires on you in the end if they took your advice, you know, really by you know, feeling bad about, you know, like certain things, that kind of stuff.
An example of that would be the listing price of a home.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times what I will do is I will come with the approach of educating them, giving them all the information, put it in black and white, give them a range, but then at the end, given all the information that I've shown you here, what do you think we should list your home for?
There you go.
And make them decide.
Decide, yes. And make sure that all the parties have been heard, that they feel that they've been heard. This is another thing. Anybody that you're dealing with, just make sure that they feel that whatever they had to say or whatever they had to actually kind of bring up to your attention, that you're really paying attention. Because that's a big turnoff, a big no-no for some people, especially. You know, if they were ignored. And I've seen that happen sometimes, like one of the spouse get ignored and the person is actually only focused on one person and the other person got ignored. So it's, you know, that thing can backfire on you as well. So make sure, because you have to, remember when we're negotiating with the listing agent, but we're also negotiating with our clients. And that listing agent is negotiating with the seller. So if you're the listing agent, you're negotiating with the seller, right? Everything is a negotiation in that sense. Because in order for everything to connect, you have to actually be able to kind of logically explain why the seller would want to take that offer, or counter the offer, or what numbers might work, right? So you have to be constantly gauging where everybody, because you're in between at least two parties every time, right? So, and my general rule is you give a little, you take a lot. Give a little in terms of like the actual benefits that you're putting it out there, but make it look like it's a lot, because you know, perception is reality.
Yes.
Perception is reality. If you can create a perception that the person that you're dealing with is getting the best in the world, and of course, the other rule is you underpromise and then you overperform. But in reality, the result, you already know what it looks like, but then you underpromise the results, and then when the results come in more than they were expecting, then you're like a hero, right? So it's all in the presentation, it's all in the perception of how you actually see it. And the best marketing people out there, you're not buying like merchandise or service that's not on the average market. Most of the time they're actually on the average market. They just marked it up higher and then throw it back down, right? I mean, you've seen this all the time in a lot of the marketing.
Half
50%
off of
off.
3 times as much, yeah,
Yeah.
half off of 3 times much is
Yeah.
not a deal, yeah.
Yeah.
Publix, yeah, half
Yeah, there you
off,
go.
a 2 for 1, when you marked it up 3 times more than it should be, is not a deal.
And just remember, whatever you're trying to convince a person, make sure it's logical to you before you present it to the person. Because if it's not logical to you, don't expect the other person will actually kind of receive it this way. Does that make sense? You know, so sometimes I've seen people do this. You know, like they're like delusional in terms of like what they're explaining to their client. They're trying to explain to a client, let's say, that buying a condo is great, but in reality they're looking for a townhouse, right?
You're trying to convince them.
Yes,
Yeah,
convince it this
yeah.
way. No, it doesn't work like this. It doesn't work like this. It just doesn't work. So just make sure if you want to have successful transactions, not only for that transaction, for every referral that you're going to get. So always think this way. Like, I sold this person this house, will this person refer me a client later on in the future? Or will they be ashamed and embarrassed to even present me to anyone because I messed up? Maybe they don't find out right now, maybe they find out later. No, you don't want to do that. You want to actually do the right thing from the get-go, get them to the closing, knowing what they actually made the decision on, so that they can keep referring business to you. And that's where the bigger part of the business. That's the iceberg. That's the bottom of the iceberg, is the referrals. The top of the iceberg is the actual client, right? And make it a joint effort to find a solution. So a good negotiator will make it feel that you came up with the idea. And that's where the whole, kind of, what would we call that? What word was that earlier that we talked about? Affirmation. That's where the affirmation comes in from. Because you try to make it their idea to begin with.
Right.
And they'll own it. Especially if you kind of put them out there already, that they're like this type of person that's wonderful to actually work with. That they'll act the part. And people don't even realize that they're acting the part that you created for them to act on. So, and that's it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And that concludes our presentation.
That was
Thanks.
pretty nice.
Thanks for coming.